All right, let's start the session. So I believe everybody has joined in. So today we are going to start with our lab session. So we'll be seeing how we can design a process. What are the different kind of activities that can be involved in the process? What are the different components that we can include while designing a process? We are going to see all these things. And if we have time, then we will also start today. What are the different types of variables that can be used in a process, as well as whatever services and artifacts that we have in BPM. So what kind of variables can we create over here? Okay. So as I said on the very first day, when we discussed about the overview of the process designer, right? Like whenever we have to start or whenever I need to create anything new, then I have to go on the left hand side and I have to just next to every component there is a plus sign, right? So we have to use this plus sign to create new artifacts. Now if I want to create a process, then I have to come on the left hand side palette and I have the first option which says processes, and if I click on the plus sign here, I would get this option of process. Let me click on it. Now, before I create this process, just an update, like initially before 8.5.5, when there was no web designer, we had only one option to design a process. That is through desktop designer. We used to create BPD, okay, which we call as business process definition. Now, there are many projects across the world right now that people are still using the desktop designer, okay, the traditional desktop designer. Like even in our project, if I talk about, we are still using the desktop designer and we are still using BPD. So maybe in future, whenever this desktop designer is getting deprecated, is already deprecated, there are many projects which are starting now. They are not using the desktop designer at all. And even there are projects which were working in the traditional desktop designer. They have migrated everything to the web designer. Okay. So initially we used to create a BPD. Now what we do, we create a process. There is no difference between creating a BPD and a process. Only difference is BPD can be created through the desktop designer and process can be created only through the web designer. Okay, so here I am creating a process. So we'll start with designing a very simple process today, that is leave application. But going ahead, maybe in our coming sessions, we are going to change this use case into a different use case. Okay, so we are going to continue with personal loan application. And the reason why I want to include that process in our sessions, because that would add more complexity. And whenever a process has more complexity, there is always a chance to learn more. Okay, so for the time being, since we are starting new, there's a first lab session, so I'm going to design a leave application process. Now if you see the naming convention, the way I'm naming this process, the name of the process can be big. Okay, it's not that you have to keep it within one word or two words. It can be big, it can be like 3 words, not an issue. But if you are using 3 different words, then definitely put a space in between. Okay, and always start the first word or whatever words you're starting, it should always start with an uppercase. Okay, so there are many people who create the process, but they use or they name the process using a lowercase letter, starting with a lowercase letter. So that is incorrect. Okay, so our target is to our target would be to understand the best practices. Okay, whatever best practices are there, we are going to follow them. Okay, so this is the name of the process and I click on finish. Anybody has any question? Okay, all right, so this is the leave application process that we have created, that I have created here. And right now what I see a start message event, and on the right hand side there is an end message event. Okay, so these two things I can see, start and end. So this we call a start event and this we call as end event. Okay, now there are different types of start event, there are different types of end event. We're going to discuss on this later. We have session on events. That time we'll be discussing on the different types of start and end event. So right now we have this start event, I can see. And what a start event does, a start event, it starts a process. Whenever we are going to create a service flow, or whenever we are going to create some other service, which is not a process, there also we will have similar start event and an end event. Okay, so start event will always start a process or a service, and end event will always end the process and the service. Okay, now what we see there is a diagram, and I see there is something called team, and on this team I can see there is one start and an end event. So what is this team? What is the system? I can see there are two different components on my diagram. One says team and the other says system. Okay, so what are these things? These are called lanes. Okay, what do we call them? Let me open a notepad. So we call them as lanes. Okay, so lanes, what is a lane? Lane is nothing but, so you can see here, we have two different lanes in this process. Whenever you are creating a process, by default, two lanes will be provided to you. This component lane, I can add as many as I can depending on the requirement. Now coming to what is a lane is nothing but it can consist of some activity. Okay. Now let's think of this leave application process which we are designing. Now this leave application process, it involves two different teams, right? One is the employee team and the other is the manager team. Now, if an employee is applying for some leave, whenever he submits the leave application, the task that is created next is for the manager who will take some action on that leave application. And once the manager has completed taking the action, the process will also end, right? So very two simple activities we will have. And I can see in this process, there are only two teams who are involved in this process, right? So whenever you have two different teams, then in that case, I should have two different lanes. Okay. So we are not discussing about the system lane. We'll discuss about this later. So right now I'm talking about this lane which says team, and this kind of lane, guys, we call it as a human lane. Okay. So there are two types of lane. One is the human lane and the other is a system lane. What is a human lane? In this kind of lane, if I am adding an activity, then that activity can be accessed by some end user. Okay, so this kind of activity we call them as a user activity, and this user activity can be accessed or can be triggered or can be accessed by whom? By a user, which is a human. And what is system activity? System activity, first of all, it can be placed only in the system lane, and a system activity doesn't need any human intervention. I'll give an example. A manager, when takes an action on the leave application, an email is being triggered to the employee saying that your leave application has been approved, right? So this email notification is a system activity. Nobody manually is typing an email. So I have written some code that would send an email to the respective participant or the employee, right? So going back to our process, here we can see there is something called team, and the other lane I can see as system. Now team is where you can add a user activity. It is considered as a human lane. And in this process which we are designing, we should have two different human lanes. Why? Because we have two different teams and each lane will belong to that team. So one lane will belong to the employee, which will have the employee activity where the employee is going to submit the leave application, is going to fill up that leave application and submit that. And the other lane will be the manager lane, which will have the manager activity And in that, through that manager activity, the manager would approve or reject the leave application, right? Now consider a process which has got, say, 3 different activities which will be taken care by 3 different teams. So in that case, how many human lanes should we have?
3.
Karthik.
Correct. So we should have 3 different human lanes in that case. Coming to the system lane, we should have, guys, as per the best practice, we should have only one system lane in a process. Okay. Now, what kind of activities I can add over here in the system lane? Say, after the employee has submitted the leave application, I want to insert this entire transaction into a database, right? So we consider this to be, or we consider this to be as a system task, and we have to add the system task in the system lane. Okay. So any kind of system activities which does not need any human intervention, that we can add in the system lane. Another example, say in this process, in the process layer, I want to interact, or this process wants to interact with some external application. There is some external interface, say Java. I want to make a call to that external service, and I want to get some response which might be needed in this process going ahead, right? So in that case, again, I have to design a system activity. I have to develop a system activity, and that system activity or service needs to be added in the system lane, right? So these are the 2 different lanes that we have in a process, which we can utilize while designing the process based on the requirement that we have. Now the question is, how can we differentiate between a human lane and a system lane, right? So how can we differentiate? Okay, we do have questions. Okay, this question is from Bhupalam Bharadwaj. So hi Rahul, you told that 3 lanes are there, human, employee, manager. No. So there are 2 types of lanes. One is a human lane and the other is a system lane. Okay. And what we are designing in this process, considering that we are having here, right now we have 2 lanes, which I have not designed. This is when I created this process. That time by default, these lanes were added. Now, if I want to add more lanes, I will definitely add, definitely I have to add. So before adding the lane, I'm just discussing about like what is the basic idea of lane in BPM. Okay. So there are 2 types of lanes. One is human lane and the other system lane. I believe we are good with this, that human lane will consist of user activities or human activities that will need some human intervention, and a system lane will have system activities which will not need any human intervention. Right? Are we good over here?
Yes, Rahul.
Rahul, this is Kirtana. Actually, I think his question is with respect to the user attached to the lane. So, for example, we have 3 users. He might be asking that each user should be associated with particular lane, right?
No. So not I didn't say the term user. I use the term team. Right?
Maybe
It is
he's
not
asking
user.
in that
Yeah.
perspective. I suppose.
No, that's fine. So now is it clear?
Yes, Rahul, I understand, Rahul.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
So here it is not that each user will have a lane. Okay. It is not like that. Each team will have a lane, right? If I talk about a very complex process, say a credit card application process, which will have various teams involved, right? Starting from the verification team, followed by the verification, residence verification team, office verification team, reference verification team. Then we can have someone called underwriter team. What is that underwriter team? Who is an underwriter? Any idea, guys? What does an underwriter do in a bank? Whatever loan you are applying, right? Whatever credit card we are applying for, all these loans and credit cards are approved by an underwriter. Okay. So underwriter is like a credit manager. In other words, who will check the credit score of the customer and would approve or reject the loan, right? So even underwriter will have a separate lane because it's a separate team. So say whenever you are getting the requirement for the first time, the first thing that an architect does, what he does, he will first read the requirement properly. He will discuss with the customer or the client that, okay, so I can see that there are like 3 different teams who can be involved in this process, right? So whenever if there are 3 different teams who are involved in the process, who are participating in the process, then in that case I will have 3 different lanes, 3 different human lanes. Okay, so as many teams you have in the process, those many lanes or human lanes you should have. And system lane should be only one in the process. I should not have more than one system lane in the process. Okay, we are good. If we are good, then the question is, for this scenario which we are implementing right now, where we have 2 different teams, employee and manager, how many human lanes should we have?
2.
Two human lanes.
2, Rahul.
Two human lanes.
2.
Correct. That is right. So we will have 2 different human lanes in the process. Now, what I was about to discuss is how do we differentiate between a human lane and a system lane? Is there any way we can differentiate between a human lane and a system lane? Yes, definitely. So if you see, this is a system lane. Now in IBM BPM, guys, whenever you click on any component, okay, so right now you see I have clicked on this component team, right? That is the reason why it is being highlighted. If I click on this start event, it will be highlighted in this way. If I click on this end event, it will be highlighted in this way, right? Similarly, if I click on the system lane, this is how it is getting highlighted, right? So whenever you click on any component in IBM BPM, the properties of that component are visible below. Okay, you see, I clicked on the system lane and the name was system. Do you see this? It has a general property and the name I can see as system, right? So whenever you click on any component, the properties of that component will be visible below. Similarly, if you click on this team, this human lane, you see right now the label got changed to team, right? From system to team. So whenever I am clicking on the system lane, what I can see, what properties I can see the name properties there, which you can definitely change at any point of time. Then you have color, which is optional. This is ID. So every component, whatever you are adding in this process, be it a start event, be it an end event, be it a lane, be it an activity, any component you are adding, every component will have a unique identifier. Okay, that is what it is being displayed over here. Then you have some documentation. It is up to you whether you want to add some documentation or not. So if there is a new developer who is joining in, if you want to help him by adding this documentation over here, then definitely it's helpful. Else you can ignore it. On the right hand side, I have another property called behavior property. And then below the behavior property, I have something called default lane team, which means that this lane, which I have selected right now, there is some team who is involved in this lane. What is that team? The name of the team is system. Whenever you see a team called system is involved or mapped on a lane, that lane is considered as a system lane. This is the first thing that we identify, right? And what is the second one? The second one is very clear. It says each system lane, and there is a checkbox next to it. Whenever you see this checkbox is marked, right, which means it is definitely a system lane. If I click on this team, do you see each system lane is checked? It is not checked, right? So in this process, when I first created this process, by default, a system lane was added, right? And this I can now go on and whatever system activities I want to add, I can definitely add over here. The question is, can I convert any other lane into system lane? Yes, the answer is yes. technically it is possible. Like this is a human lane. If I want to convert this into a system lane, I can definitely come down and I can enable this checkbox and I can make this as a system lane. But the best practice, which I said, we should not have more than one system lane in a process. Okay. I can have n number of human lanes if the number of teams involved in the process is equal to n, right? But system lane always remains the same. It should only be one. Okay. So I should never convert any other lanes into a system lane, right? So we are good. We'll be discussing about the teams as well, like how the teams are created, how the mappings are done with the lanes. All these things we are going to discuss in future. We have sessions on that. Now, this team, which I can see is this lane which has been added. I can see the name is team. Now, if I want to change the name, right? So how I can change the name? So I have this property called name, and I can easily change this name to any other label, whichever I want to give. So this process, guys, it will be involved. It is involved by within two different teams. One is the employee team and the other is the manager team. So like I said, we should have two different lanes. So the first human lane should be employee, right? So I can consider this lane as an employee lane. And since this is an employee lane, any activity which has to be accessed by the employee, that activity only can be added in this lane. I should not add an activity which belongs to a manager in the employee lane. That is the reason why we have different lanes, right? So this is my employee lane, and now I should have another human lane. So there has to be the manager lane. So how I can create another lane? Very simple. On the right hand side, guys, we have a palette. So this palette consists of different components that can be added in this process, right? The first component says lane. So if you see the definition, it says a container for the activities and events in a process. A lane usually groups activities that are completed by members of a team, right? Exactly what I said. So this lane, if I want to add a new lane, simple. It's very simple. Click on it and just drag it over here. You see another lane now got added and it says team. So again, you can change the name of this lane. Right now it is highlighted, which means I have selected this lane. I will come down to the properties. I can see the label as team. And now I can change this into manager, right? So I believe you guys cannot see the entire process. So what I can do, I will zoom out so that you can see the entire process. Okay, so you have this zoom in, zoom out option for your process so that, see, usually whenever you're going to work in a project, you will see the process is quite complex. It will have like 4 different lanes or 5 different lanes. This can also come. So in that case, definitely you will not be able to see the entire design in one go, right? So in that case, you can zoom in and zoom out, and you can add the activities or whatever work you want to do on a single lane, that you can do. Okay. Now, so we have 3 different lanes now. One is system, the other is employee, and the third is the manager. And employee and manager are the human lanes. Now, I have to now add some activities, right? I have to add some employee activity. I have to add some manager activity. So today we are going to see how we can add those activities and what are the different types of activities that can be added in this process. Okay. So first of all, before going to activities, the first and the very basic thing that we should know, this process, this leave application process, which we are designing. So this process should start from the employee, right? So employee will have the first task where the employee will fill up the application form and will submit their application form. So this lane, employee lane, will have the start event, right? Since we are starting with the employee activity, That's the reason the start event should always be there in the employee lane. Any lane wherever you think that the first activity belongs in this process, you should add the start event at that point in that lane. Okay. Similarly, in this process, the last activity is the manager activity, where the manager would take some action to approve or reject the leave application. So in that case, I have to add the end event in the manager lane. How I can drag it? Just simply you can drag it and you can place it in this lane. Okay. So this is the best practice. End event can be placed anywhere. There is no technical challenge you will face. Similarly, start event also you can place it in the manager lane also. It will not be an issue. But this is the best practice. This is what we should follow whenever we are designing a process. Okay. Now we will see how can we add an activity and what are the different types of activities that are there in a process. So on the right hand side, guys, you see the second component from the top. It says activity. What is an activity? An activity that performs work during the running of the process, right? I gave an example on the very first day, like day to day we are working on some process, right? So every day we are waking up in the morning, brushing our teeth, we are having our breakfast, we are we are going to office, right? So all these are the different activities. So similar kind of activity I have to implement in this process, and we call them as a business activities. And now we'll see how what are the different types of business activities that are involved in this IBM BPM process. So if I want to add an activity in the process, it's very simple. Simply drag it in the middle. Okay. So you see what activity got added. It says user task, right? Now, before understanding this, let's go to the right hand side. Okay. You see just next to this activity, there's a drop down. It's a kind of arrow kind of thing is there, right? So if I click on it, it will show me what are the different types of activities that are there in this process. Okay. So what is the first one? The first one says user task. This is exactly what I was talking about, like the two different basic activities what we can add. We can add user activity or user task, right? And the other is system activity or system task. What is a user task, guys? A user task is a task which involves a human being, which needs a human intervention, which means if I'm adding a user task, I also need to design a coach or a UI for this user task, right? So exactly what we want to implement here. Employee activity or employee user task, which will have an application form, and that application form needs to be filled up by an employee of an organization, and he can submit that application using a button at the end, right? So this is a UI, right? So we can design a UI through a user task, and a user task, that's the reason why we're adding this in this process right now for this employee activity. Okay, we are good with the user task.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes, Rahul.
okay, good. Now we come to
Rahul,
yes.
when you drag the in the employee table,
Employee lane.
it automatically selected user task, right?
Correct.
Uh, so when we drag it somewhere else, will it automatically select depending upon the table?
Okay, that's a good question. Now my question to everyone. Okay, now my question to everyone. When I just dragged this a task or an activity without knowing what kind of activity it is, right? It became a user task. Can someone say me why it became a user task when I added this in the employee lane?
Because it's a human lane, Rahul.
Absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. Because if you see the property, I did not enable this system lane, right? So whenever you add an activity on a human lane, by default, it will always become a user task. Similarly, if I drag an activity without knowing, see, I can also drag it in this way, right? I can also drag it in this way also, but without knowing what kind of activity it is. If I drag it directly on a system lane, it will convert itself into a system task. Now, why it did not become a system task? We did something. I believe I enabled or disabled this thing, maybe at some point of time. Mhm. It is becoming a user task. Usually in BAW, I have seen, even in BAW, I have seen in the web designer, if you are dragging an activity in the system lane, it automatically becomes a system task. Okay. Now, if it is not becoming, then not an issue. I can definitely click on this drop down and I can drag a system task over here. Okay. So like we have a user task, similarly, we have a system task, and a system task, like I said, it does not need any human intervention. And such kind of tasks I should always add in the system lane. I should never add a system task in a human lane. Now, if you ask me that, Rahul, if I add a system task in a human lane, will it still work or it will throw some error? It will still work. Okay, it will not throw any error. I can add a system task in a human lane as well. But again, best practice, we should always follow the best practice. So that's the reason we have a system lane, so that we can add some system task over here. Okay, so any system task I need to add, I have to add it in the system lane. And the answer was correct, that the reason why it became a user task, because I added an activity and I added that directly in the employee lane, which is a human lane. That's the reason it became a user task. Okay, now what are the other types of activities that we have? We know user task is there, we know system task is there. What is the other one? We have something called decision task. Okay, what is a decision task? What it says: results, returns the result of a decision as implemented by a rule. Okay, now anyone, does anyone know what is a rule?
It accept or reject from the manager.
No, that's an action. That's an action that you are performing on an activity.
Set of conditions to perform a task.
Okay.
To perform something.
That is correct. Somewhat that is correct. But in a bigger way, okay, in a larger way. Okay, how many of you have heard of this tool called IBM Operational Decision Manager? Anybody has heard of this tool? Anybody has heard of this technology called Rule Engine?
I heard, Rahul. This is Kirtana.
Okay. Okay. So not a problem. It's not necessary that you have to know, since you are just beginning your career in BPM. So this components you would also know going ahead. Okay. So IBM ODM, or basically the rule engine. What is a rule engine? Rule engine is a component, okay, where we can design some rules. Okay, where we can create some rule. Now, what is a rule? Rule is nothing but some conditions, okay, which I can create. And whenever some condition is true, whatever result I want to populate in that condition, that result will be populated, right? For example, say A, there is a column called A, there is a column called B, and then we have another column called sum, okay, or maybe say subtraction is there. So whenever A is greater than B, then the subtraction will be A minus B. Whenever B will be greater than A, then the subtraction will be B minus A, right? So these are kind of rules that I can define. Such kind of rules, guys, we can define in a technology or in a domain called rule engine. IBM ODM is one of the IBM tools which is involved in this rule engine. Like we have BPM, BPM is a domain. Similarly, rule engine is also a different domain. Okay. And like we have IBM BPM, in this technology, we have IBM BPM, we have Pega, we have the other tools also, like APN also we have, right? Similarly, in the rule engine, we have IBM ODM, and there are other tools also. Okay. So IBM ODM is where you can design a rule, where you can create some rule. You must have heard, if in your engineering days, something called decision table or decision tree, right? We have heard of trees, we have done data structure and all those things in our engineering days. That time we have heard of something called tree, we have heard something called table, right? So those kind of things can be created in IBM ODM, okay, where we design the rules and the decision trees and the decision tables. Coming to IBM BPM, now IBM BPM is a BPM tool, but still IBM BPM gives you a component called decision task through which I can design a rule. Okay. Now the question is this rule, whatever rules we are designing over here, are they sufficient? Or I mean, in ODM, I can create say 100 rules, right, for a project. Over here in IBM BPM, I cannot do that. It does not support. Okay. If I create a decision table in IBM ODM, it can support say n number of rows, n number of columns. But in IBM BPM, it does not support. So there are certain limitations, but even with those limitations also, we can create a decision task, and this decision task we can create some rule is like, say for example, uh, say I want to populate some data on some parameter, right? Now say if manager decision is approved, then say a variable, I have a variable where I'll populate the string called approved. Okay. And if the manager decision is rejected, then that variable will contain rejected. Okay. Like this, I'm populating some kind of parameter using some rule, exactly the way I'm saying you the rule. This is the same way we can write a rule in IBM BPM. This kind of rule is called as business action rule, or we call it as a BAL rule also, which is basically a business action language. Okay, so this is called business action language rule. And yes, this has certain limitations in IBM BPM, since this is a BPM tool. So rule engine definitely will not be here. So for that, we have a separate tool from IBM, which we call as IBM operational decision manager. Okay, so this is a different technology altogether. But nowadays, if some customer is purchasing the license of IBM BAW, he gets IBM ODM as well. Okay, so in BAW nowadays, you get IBM ODM as well in this tool. All right, so coming back to this, so yes, through a decision task, I can definitely design some kind of decision, some kind of decisioning through some rule or through some table. Again, decision table is also available over here, but yes, again, there are some limitations. uh, like if I want to, I can add maximum say 4 conditions in the decision table that we have. But in generally, if I want to implement any rule through a decision table, say through IBM ODM or any other rule engine, I can implement n number of conditions. So definitely, obviously, customer would definitely want to use ODM only in that case, or any other rule engine. They will not consider BPM. So yes, the thing is that decision task is used very seldom in BPM, but we will have a session where I will show you how to implement a decision task in the process. Okay. So right now, this is not the priority, but definitely we are going to cover it. Yes. Just can you please repeat after activity task? Okay, so Suleiman is saying that he has missed some information due to connectivity issues. So after activity task, can I repeat? So I discuss a lot of things after activity task. So after activity task, we discussed about system task. System task is a system defined task, is an automated task which does not need any human intervention, and that can be added in a system lane. Then we have a decision task, Decision task is where we can create some decisions, like we can create some tables, we can add some rules, and where we can add this, it does not need any human intervention again, right? So we can add this in a system lane, right? What we have next, we have server script. It says runs JavaScript code on the server. In very simple words, guys, this is a script and I can add this in the process. Why I need to add this in this process? If I want to implement any code, if I want to write any code in the process layer, then I should definitely use a server script. Okay, as simple as that. If you want to write a code in the process layer, that code can be of JavaScript, it can be some IBM BPM code. Okay, if I want to write some kind of code in the process layer, then server script is the one on which I have to write my code. Okay, we want to cover everything whatever you see over here. Okay, so don't worry, we'll see how a server script can be implemented in the process, but we will see first how a script can be implemented in a human service, in an activity, in a user task basically. After that, we'll come to the process layer. So the question is where we can add a server script. Again, it's an automated task, so we should add this in the system lane. Any other activity apart from user task, everything needs to be added in the system lane. Only a user task can be added or should be added in the human lane. Okay, rest everything, whatever you see, everything needs to be added in the system lane. Coming to the next one is sub process. Okay, what is a sub process? It says encapsulates a collection of logically related steps contained within the parent process. Let's understand in very simple word. We are designing this process, right? Say we have the first task as the employee task. The second task will have the manager, which I'm going to add. I have not added anything till now in the manager lane. And then after the manager takes an action, I am going to perform 3 consecutive system activities. Okay. Say what are the system activities? Say the first activity which I am going to add, say it will insert this entire transaction into a database. Okay, that is my first system activity which I am going to add. The next system activity which I will add is an email notification activity. Like an email will be sent out to the employee saying that your leave application has been submitted and has been approved. Whatever has been, like whatever application form he has filled up, whatever action has been taken by the manager. So considering all those things, we are going to create some email, and that email I'm going to send out to the employee. Okay. The next activity which I'm going to add is an SMS activity. It's a kind of SMS notification which will also be triggered to the employee. Maybe the employee is not in front of the system. Nowadays we are doing work from home, right? So maybe we are not in front of the system. Maybe due to some network connectivity, there can be some network issues, right? That we are not connected to the internet. So we have added also another activity which will send some SMS to the employee. Okay. Now we have 3 different activities, right? 3 different system activities, and we know that all the system activities will be they will be implemented, they will be executed one after the other, right? So the thing is, instead of adding 3 separate consecutive activities, I can add a sub process over here, and inside the sub process I can define these 3 different activities. Okay, this is the reason why we use a sub process. So sub process is used to encapsulate consecutive activities together inside it, and I can place the sub process in this parent process, and that whenever the token will reach in the sub process, whatever activities I've added inside, they will be executed. And it has been found that if you have 3 different system activities and if you're adding them without a sub process, performance somehow it goes down. How it goes down? I will not say performance will entirely go down, but the execution time somehow it is more. Okay. But if I am creating a sub process, and inside the sub process, if I'm adding these 3 consecutive sequential activities, then in that case, the execution time will be less. It will not be huge less. Like, I'm not saying that it will go down to like 10 milliseconds. No, but maybe 3-4 seconds, 3-4 milliseconds will definitely be the difference. Okay. So that is the reason, if you have 3 consecutive activities, it can be also a human activity, guys. Okay. Not necessarily it has to be a system activity. Say in the employee lane, say you have 3 consecutive user activities or user tasks. So instead of adding them in this lane separately, I can create a sub process, and inside the sub process, I can add the 3 different user activities. Okay. Today, I am just giving you guys the overview of what are the different activities that I can add. Okay. We are going to cover each and every topic, each and every activity. Okay. So don't worry, today is just the overview session, but yes, I want you guys to understand, because whenever we are going to start off with, say, sub process, so it should be there like this, that you should all know that what is a sub process. Okay. And then we'll see the implementation that day. So sub process can be implemented both in the employee lane as well as in the system lane over here. Okay. What else okay, any questions or any doubts till now, guys, on any of these activities?
No, Rahul.
Okay. Okay.
Rahul, can you explain me what is that service script once again?
Service, this one?
No, the script uses a JavaScript, right?
Yeah. So
Server
this
script.
is, yeah. So server script, basically it is a script where we can add our code, where I can write my code. Okay. Now the thing is that you can say that, can't I write a code in user task? Can't I write a code in a system task? Yes, definitely I can write. But for adding a user task, I have to create a human service, right? I believe you all must be familiar with this term human service. Maybe we don't know exactly how to implement, but a human service is something which we can implement on a user task. Okay. So like, I have added this user task in the employee lane, but in the backend, I have to go and create a user task, or sorry, a human service, and that human service, I have to map it over here. Okay. Similarly, for a system task, I have to either create a kind of system service, a service flow, and then only I can map it over here. Okay. Similarly, script, server script. Now, going inside the client side human service, or inside the human service, or any service flow, I can definitely write the code, but I am writing the code in the service layer. I am not writing the code in the process layer. Okay. But if I want to write a code in the process layer, then I have to use a server script activity, which is this one. Okay.
Got it, Rahul. Thank you.
All right. Any other doubts, guys? We are good with whatever activities we have discussed till now.
Yes, Rahul.
All right. Okay. All right. Now we come to the next activity, that is a linked process. Okay. What is a linked process? In very simple words, say we have a leave application process which we are designing. Now from this process, I want to trigger another process. Okay. So in that scenario, I can implement a linked process activity in the system lane, and I can map a process in this link process. As a result, what would happen? I can trigger another process through the leave application process. Okay. So this is my link process. It says calls another process. After the link process is completed, the parent process resumes execution. Yes. So after my linked process is completed, then I will again come back to the leave application process. and whatever activity is there after the linked process, that activity will be again triggered. Okay, so it is considered as an activity or as a part of an activity of your process, and I can actually map another process through this activity called linked process. Okay, what else we have? Event sub process. Okay, now this is again something which we'll be discussing later, so we'll have a session on events. So in an event, guys, so in an event I can implement an event sub process. Okay, so what happens, say some kind of event has occurred in this leave application process. Say this process received some information from some other external application. Okay, now there is maybe a component in the middle of this process where we are calling some external interface and we are getting some result, right? Now say this result which I am getting from the external application through this process, I want to pass it to another process. Okay, so this information which I want to pass from this process to another process, this can be done with the help of event sub process. Okay, so event sub process can be implemented in this kind of scenarios. We will have a session. We'll have 2 sessions on event is such big, so there are a lot of things we have to discuss, so we're going to cover this event sub process at that time. Now coming to one information, guys, so in BAW, okay, now in BAW also you will have your IBM BPM, you will have your web designer, desktop designer. This event sub process is not there in BAW. Okay, it has been deprecated. You can yourself verify this if you register yourself in the BAW on trial version or on cloud version. So you can, if you register there successfully, then you can definitely go and access the web designer over there, and you will be able to see that event sub process is not there. Okay, it is not there anymore with the BAW. So it was there till 8.6, but from BAW onwards, this event sub process is not there. Okay, so, but we'll still cover this topic, don't worry. All right, so we are good with the different types of activities that we have, guys. Any questions on these activities? Then we'll start designing the process. All right, we are good. So now we will start designing our process, whatever is left. Okay, so we are left with a few things. So here, the first thing that we did is we added a user task, but I have to change the name to employee task. Okay, so we have an employee task here. The name should be proper. It should not be the default name. You should have to rename it so that whenever you're designing, the other person can understand what exactly this task will do. Now, like an employee task, I have to also create a manager task, right? And I have to place it in the manager lane. So for that, again, I'll go on the right hand side palette. I have this user task. So I will drag it over here. I will name this as a manager task. Okay, so this is how I can add some tasks. Now end event, yes, it will be placed in the manager lane because this is the manager task, is the last activity. Now if we have any system activity which is maybe after the manager task, I want to execute some system activity, then definitely the system activity has to be placed over here, and the end event will also come in the system lane. Okay, so wherever you are ending, the end event should be there in that lane. Now obviously if I trigger this process right now, then nothing will work because all these different components, they are not connected. The very first term, guys, I used when I was explaining you what is a process in day one. A process consists of some sequential activities, right? Sequential. So how we can maintain a sequence in a process? We maintain it using a component called sequence flow. Okay, so through a sequence flow, I can connect all these components together and that's how I can complete the design of the process. So how we can connect sequence flow? Very simple. Use your cursor and just hover your mouse or hover your cursor on top of this component called start event. You see there are 4 different control points. We call them as control points. Okay, and from here you can just drag this and connect it to any control point of this employee task. Similar way, again, you move your cursor over here on top of this employee task where you have these 3 different control points. So you can use any one and you can connect it to the manager task. And similar way, manager task also needs to be connected with the end event. So same way, I'll do the same connection. Okay, so now this process is completed. Whenever this process will be triggered, it will trigger from the start event, and the start event will basically actually triggers the process. And after the process is triggered, it will move to the employee task. Employee task will be active till the time some employee goes and claims it and fills up that application form. Whenever he submits that application form, now it will move to the manager task. The manager task, whenever he claims the task, whenever he claims the manager task, then he would be able to see all the details, whatever the employee has filled up in read-only mode. And then he will have 2 actions. Either he can approve it or he can reject it. If he approves it or rejects it, then it will go to the end event. And whenever it will reach, the token will reach the end event, this process will be completed. Okay, are we good with this design? Did we understand all these terms, whatever we discussed today?
Yes, Rahul.
Yes, Rahul.
Okay. Okay then. So yes, there are other components. There are other components that we have. We have gateways. We have the different types of start event. There are different types of intermediate event. There are different types of end event. So whatever you see with events, we are going to cover everything on our event session. And gateways, we will have a session very soon. So in our first 50% of the session, we'll have a gateway session as well. Okay, and this activities, we know what are the different types of activities we have already covered. And the last component, guys, this is a note. It's like if you want to add some documentation, okay, a kind of documentation which will help the developer somehow. Say this process we have just started to design. Okay, now today I'll be on leave. Okay, now say I was designing this process last night, and somehow I want to share an information with the other developers that this lane this is still incomplete. You need to add more activities over here. Okay, so I can add a note over here. Okay, so now whenever I will save this, and whenever somebody else will log in, whenever he will open the process, he will see my message is there that this lane is incomplete. And by this, he can now understand, okay, so maybe I have to add one more activity over here. Maybe something is missing over here. So accordingly, he will take that action. Okay, so it is a note so that you can interact with another developer. You want to add some information so that the developers and your leads or architects will understand, okay, so something is added over here, maybe something is missing over here. Accordingly, you can add a note. Okay, so it doesn't have any technical implementation. It is just for documentation purpose, right? So we are good. If we are good with whatever we have done today, then we will start with variables. Okay, so that tomorrow whenever we come, we can implement the variables, and we will start with the human service also. Yes, somebody has pinged in the chat. Does manager task includes accept or reject leave, or do we need to add decision task to accept or reject? No. So decision task again. So for this kind of implementations, we don't need a decision task. Okay. So decision task is actually when you implement some complex rules. Okay. Now here, whatever we want to implement, like a simple approve and reject, this can be done using buttons. Okay, so whenever the manager clicks on the approve, then I will capture the value of the approve button, whether it's true or false. It's a boolean parameter that we can map with a button. So if someone is clicking on a button, then the value of that button becomes true. So if the approval button says true, then which means that the manager has approved, will capture the value. And if the manager has clicked on reject, then the value will be true for reject button, and we will consider that the manager has rejected, and we'll move on. So it doesn't need a decision task to implement for this implementation. Okay. All right. Okay, then if you don't have questions, then we'll start off with variables today. And tomorrow we are going to implement the variables in this process. And then going ahead, we'll be seeing how to design the human services for the user task. Okay. So now so you see at the top, okay. So here, when we created this process, guys, at the top, there were different tabs, right? So we were into definition tab where we design the process. If I have to create some variable, then I have to come to variables. Okay. And if you want to see the overview of the process, this is the overview of the process. We are going to discuss about this overview. Okay. We have very important components over here, which we should know. But before that, we need to understand few more things about the process. Then only we can come back over here. Okay. So a lot of things we should be knowing over here, like SLA and your due dates and instance names, exposing the process. All these things we learn, but not now, because this will unnecessarily confuse you. Okay. So we'll be coming to this later. So variables we are going to discuss now. So what are the different types of variables that we can create in the process we are seeing here? So whatever you see right now on the screen, so these are the different types of variables that can be implemented in the process. So first is the input variable, then we have output variable, then we have private variable, and finally we have something called exposed process variables, which we discussed yesterday, right? So coming to the input variable, what do we mean by an input to this process? Very simple. In a very simple way, if this process needs an information from some external process or from some other service or from some external application, in that case I have to create an input variable. Okay, I repeat, if this process needs an input from some other process or from some other service or maybe from some external application, then in that case, this process, I have to create an input variable and I can use it in the process layer. Now I'll give an example. Say this leave application process, okay, it will be triggered, or maybe this process somewhere, it needs an input, say employee location. Okay, and then only the process will be triggered. So in that case, I can create an input variable over here. And this input variable, it will get the information from some other process, maybe from some external application, and that information is the location of the employee. And whenever I will get that information in this process, then only this process will be triggered. Okay, so this is how we can consider an input variable for a process. What is an output variable? Again, just the opposite. This process is processing some information, right? Now this information, whatever we are processing, if any of this information I want to pass to another process or to another service or to some external application, in that case I will create
an output variable. Okay, so input is when this process will need an input from some other process or service or application, and output is when I am processing some information in this process, leave application process, and I want to pass it to some external application or to some external service or process. In that case, I will create an output variable. What is private variable? So by the term private, you can understand the scope, right? So a private variable, it will hold some private information which cannot be shared with some other process or some other service or some other application. So that kind of variable which will hold the private information within the process, that we will consider as a private variable. Okay, we are good with input, output, and private. Any questions, guys?
No, Rahul.
Okay. Okay, so this is what input, output, and private means. Coming to exposed process variables, so it is the same thing which we discussed yesterday. So I can create an EPV or an exposed process variable in this process, and through that EPV, I can map some static data or some hardcode values, and that I can use in this process. Okay, maybe I'm populating the data over here through the EPV, and I'm passing the data to the user activities, and those user activities are getting this EPV value from this process layer, and they are using it. Where they're using it, they're using maybe while maybe they want to display that in the header. So maybe some text is there, they want to display it, and that text is coming from the EPV. So we can implement the EPV over here, and we can pass the value inside the user activity. Okay, apart from this 4 different type of variables, we still have another 2 type of variable. Okay, like we have an exposed process variable, we also have something called environment variable. Environment variable can also be created in IBM BPM, and also it can be used in the process. It can be used in any service, in any artifact you create. Okay, like an EPV, like an exposed process variable, environment variable also, it can hold some static value. Okay, static value or constant value. Okay, same like an EPV. Then what is the difference? The difference is an EPV or an exposed process variable should not change with environment. What do I mean by this? Say today I create an EPV in the development environment. It has a value, say Mercedes, right? Now the way we assign the value, it is actually considered that this value will never be changed. Even if I deploy this to UAT or say QA environments or in the production environment, the value should always remain the same. Yes, if the value needs to be changed, I can definitely change it. From where I can change it, guys? The value of an EPV. From which component in IBM BPM we can change the value of an EPV?
Admin tools.
Yes, admin tools. It is found in which component?
Manage EPVs.
I didn't get you.
Manage EPVs.
Yes, but where is this component? It is there in process admin, right?
Admin console. Yeah.
Yeah, so from process admin console, we can change the value of an EPV. And yes, that is correct. Through admin tools, through manage EPVs, we can change the value of an EPV, right? So yes, there is always an option to change the value of an EPV, but it is considered when EPV was first introduced in IBM BPM, it was considered that the value will never change with environment. Okay, now if I have to change the value because the customer will come, the client will say to change the value, we have to change it. But an environment variable, it is actually created so that we can have some constant value which will change with every environment. right? Can you tell me, guys, what kind of variable, what kind of value can be there which can change with environment? Can anyone think of an example and give me?
Weather.
No, weather cannot be considered. So consider it in a way that you are using this parameter which you are creating as an environment variable. You are using this parameter somewhere in an application. Okay. So what can be that kind? What can be that environment variable which we can think of very easily?
Time,
Yes, time can be there. Yes,
temperature,
temperature will not change with environment. Now here, guys, environment doesn't mean with weather environment, guys. Okay, so here environment means UAT, QA, production, development. So all these are considered as a different environments. So temperature will not change. I mean, there is a different environment we are talking about. So we have gone into geography. Let's come back to computers, guys. Okay, I'll give an example. Okay.
Host names.
Sir, any dynamic values, like if name is there, so it differs from person to person.
Okay, I'll just reframe my question. Can you think of a value which can change with every environment? Like in QA7, it has a different value. In QA1, it has a different value. In production, it will have a different value. Can you think of any value in your application which can change? Can I consider data source can be different for every environment?
I
Right?
think the application URL will change based on the environment, right? Application URL.
Yes, that we don't have to configure. BPM URLs we don't have to configure. Yes, they will change with different environments. That is correct. But any external interface which we are calling, their hostname and port number can change, right? With different values, right? Any REST calls we are making, any external calls we are making, say REST calls we are doing to some Java service. So that service URL can change with different environment, right? So these things we can implement through an environment variable. Okay. Now this value, the when we will be creating this variable, you will see that we will be defining the value separately for each and every environment. Okay. So we'll be seeing how to implement environment variable and EPV. We will have separate sessions. So, but I believe we are now aware, like what is the difference between an EPV and an ENV, right? So anybody asking you what is the difference between an EPV and ENV, you will be able to say. Okay. All right, let's go back. So environment variable can also be used in the process as well as in the service. Okay. I can definitely use it in my code. Anywhere I want to use it in my code, I can definitely use it. And that can be done in both the service layer as well as in the process layer. Okay. What else we have? The last thing that we'll be discussing today is something which is very familiar to most of us, is a business object. Very, very important. Okay. Now, before we implement or we understand what is a business object, a question to all of you. This is a leave application process that we are designing, right? Now, can you say me what is the business reference for this process? Like what I'm trying to mean by business reference, I'll tell you. Whenever this employee task will be triggered, the employee will fill up some information, right? Similarly, when he's submitting this leave application, when it goes to the manager will also take some action, right? He will approve or reject the leave, as well as he can add some comment, right? Now, considering all this information, can you tell me what are the different informations which we can find out through this process. I'll give the first example, say employee ID. Employee ID is one of those parameters or one of those information which we can get through this process, right? So can you tell me what are the different other parameters or information that we will populate through this process or will process through this entire workflow?
Type of leave.
Okay, let me just write it down. So first is employee ID. So somebody said type of leave. That is correct.
Leave duration.
Leave duration. Yes. Yes.
Reason for the
Correct. Reason or remarks of leave. Yes.
Date on which he wants the leave.
Okay. Start date,
User.
end date. We missed something. Employee name. Mobile number. Okay, fine. Mobile number we can. Then in that case, email ID will also be there. What else we have?
Port numbers.
What numbers?
Manager name.
Manager name. Yes, we can have manager name. Manager action, guys.
Yes.
Approve or reject, whatever he does, it will populate in this parameter. What else we can have?
We
Manager
can have status.
status. Yes, we can have status. So status we can consider in this parameter, manager action, right? Anything we are missing?
Notification status.
Notification status, yes, we can consider this in case we are implementing a notification. Right now we are considering a very simple process where we don't have any notifications, nothing. So yes, we also missed something, that is type of leave is the list which we are going to populate, maybe through a drop down. But whatever leave the employee is finally selecting, that also I have to store somewhere, right? So selected leave, right? So this many parameters or this many information we can process in this workflow which we have designed till now, right? Now just think, if I go back to this process, if I come to variables, definitely I have to create some EPV. I have to create some private variable, because right now this process will not need any input, right? Because we are considering it a very simple process where we are going to trigger the process by ourselves. It will not be triggered by any external application. So we don't need any input, as well as we don't need any output also, because we are not going to pass this information to some other process, right? So we will consider private variable over here. Now just think how many variables we have to create. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 parameters we have to create as private variables over here, right? Similar way, whenever I'm going to implement this employee task, right, I have to create some human service because it's a user task. There also I need to create at least say 10 to 11 parameters over there. Maybe I will not create manager action and everything, because that will be taken care by the manager task. But this entire like 10 to 11 variables I have to create for the employee human service also. Similarly, manager task will actually need all the 13 parameters, because I have to show all the information to the manager also in read-only mode, right? So isn't it an overhead? Don't you think that say a developer, he misses out on some parameter, maybe say start date and reason of leave, somewhere in some human service, which means your process will not have the entire information. Number one, manager will also not be able to see this information, why he's taking leave, which is a start date, right? So the process design will be faulty, correct? If I miss out on any of this parameter, this entire information, we consider it as a business reference of the process. when the architect or the designer, when they sit with this requirement, right? Whenever they are doing the analysis, they do two things parallelly. One is the design of the process. Second is to find out the business reference of the process. Okay. So whenever you consider them as the business reference, now what I can do, I can create a business object, say employee information, and I can actually add all these parameters under this business object. And if I add this business object in my process, in my human service, in all the human services, if I am using say 10 human services in one process, if I'm using a single business object in all the human services, then I will not have that issue where I have to go and add anything, or if I'm missing something, again I have to redo that work. That overhead is not there. Number one. Second, just think if there was no business object. You have added say 27, say 10 parameters you have added in employee human service, and all the 13 parameters you have added in the manager human service. Tomorrow the customer comes and tells you that you have to add a new parameter for the employee, say maybe employee location, which means again you have to go to your employee human service. There you have to make the change, you have to add a parameter. We have to go to the manager human service, again there you have to add a parameter. And also the process, in the process layer also you're going to create all these 13 parameters, right? There also you need to add one more, right? So a developer will do a lot of work for this, so it's an overhead for him. But if I'm using a business object, if I'm creating a business object, tomorrow if the customer comes and tells me that I need to delete something or I need to add a new parameter, then automatically wherever I'm using the same business object in the services or in the processes, everywhere it will be automatically updated. Okay, so that is the reason you will see if you work on any project right now, if you're already working in some project, you will see there is a concept of business object always. Okay, so a business object is a mandatory thing which we consider as a business reference of your process. Okay, so tomorrow when we are starting, we are going to start with designing a business object for us where we are going to add these parameters, and then we'll proceed with human services. Any questions, any queries, guys? You can ask me now.
Rahul, can we
Yes.
have multiple business objects?
Yes, we can have.
Okay.
We can have multiple business objects inside, and even we can have a business object which contains multiple business object.
You mean nested?
Nested, yes.
Okay.
We will see all these different scenarios tomorrow.